Chapter 1 of Arsène Lupin vs. Herlock Sholmes by Maurice Leblanc, translated by George Moorhead. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Harrington. Arsène Lupin vs. Herlock Sholmes by Maurice Leblanc, translated by George Moorhead. Chapter 1. Lottery Ticket Number 514. On the 8th day of last December, Monsieur Gerbois, professor of mathematics at the College of Versailles, while rummaging in an old curiosity shop, unearthed a small mahogany writing desk which pleased him very much on account of the multiplicity of its drawers. "Just the thing for Suzanne's birthday present," thought he. And as he always tried to furnish some simple pleasures for his daughter, consistent with his modest income, he inquired the price, and, after some keen bargaining, purchased it for 65 francs. As he was giving his address to the shopkeeper, a young man, dressed with elegance and taste, who had been exploring the stock of antiques, caught sight of the writing desk, and immediately inquired its price. "It is sold," replied the shopkeeper. "Ah, to this gentleman, I presume?" Monsieur Gerbois bowed, and left the store, quite proud to be the possessor of an article which had attracted the attention of a gentleman of quality. But he had not taken a dozen steps in the street when he was overtaken by the young man who, hat in hand, and in a tone of perfect courtesy, thus addressed him. "I beg your pardon, monsieur. I am going to ask you a question that you may deem impertinent. It is this: did you have any special object in view when you bought that writing desk?" "No, I came across it by chance, and it struck my fancy." "But you do not care for it particularly?" "Oh, I shall keep it, that is all." "Because it is an antique, perhaps?" "No, because it is convenient," declared Monsieur Gerbois. "In that case, you would consent to exchange it for another desk that would be quite as convenient and in better condition?" "Oh, this one is in good condition, and I see no object in making an exchange." "But—" Monsieur Gerbois is a man of irritable disposition and hasty temper, so he replied testily: "I beg of you, monsieur, do not insist." But the young man firmly held his ground. "I don't know how much you paid for it, monsieur, but I offer you double." "No." "3 times the amount." "Oh, that will do," exclaimed the professor impatiently. "I don't wish to sell it." The young man stared at him for a moment in a manner that Monsieur Gerbois would not readily forget, then turned and walked rapidly away. An hour later, the desk was delivered at the professor's house on the Viroflay road. He called his daughter and said: "Here is something for you, Suzanne, provided you like it." Suzanne was a pretty girl, with a gay and affectionate nature. She threw her arms around her father's neck and kissed him rapturously. To her, the desk had all the semblance of a royal gift. That evening, assisted by Hortense, the servant, she placed the desk in her room. Then she dusted it, cleaned the drawers and pigeonholes, and carefully arranged within it her papers, writing material, correspondence, a collection of postcards, and some souvenirs of her cousin Philippe that she kept in secret. Next morning at 7:30, Monsieur Gerbois went to the college. At 10 o'clock, in pursuance of her usual custom, Suzanne went to meet him, and it was a great pleasure for him to see her slender figure and childish smile waiting for him at the college gate. They returned home together. "And your writing desk, how is it this morning?" "Marvelous! Hortense and I have polished the brass mountings until they look like gold." "So you are pleased with it?" "Pleased with it? Why, I don't see how I managed to get on without it for such a long time." As they were walking up the pathway to the house, Monsieur Gerbois said: "Shall we go and take a look at it before breakfast?" "Oh, yes, that's a splendid idea." She ascended the stairs ahead of her father, but, on arriving at the door of her room, she uttered a cry of surprise and dismay. "What's the matter?" stammered Monsieur Gerbois. "The writing desk is gone!" When the police were called in, they were astonished at the admirable simplicity of the means employed by the thief. During Suzanne's absence, the servant had gone to market, and while the house was left unguarded, a drayman, wearing a badge, some of the neighbors saw it, stopped his cart in front of the house and rang twice. Not knowing that Hortense was absent, the neighbors were not suspicious. Consequently, the man carried on his work in peace and tranquillity. Apart from the desk, not a thing in the house had been disturbed. Even Suzanne's purse, which she had left upon the writing desk, was found upon an adjacent table with its contents untouched. It was obvious that the thief had come with a set purpose, which rendered the crime even more mysterious, because why did he assume so great a risk for such a trifling object? The only clue the professor could furnish was the strange incident of the preceding evening. He declared, "The young man was greatly provoked at my refusal, and I had an idea that he threatened me as he went away." But the clue was a vague one. The shopkeeper could not throw any light on the affair. He did not know either of the gentlemen. As to the desk itself, he had purchased it for 40 francs at an executor's sale at Chevreuse, and believed he had resold it at its fair value. The police investigation disclosed nothing more. But Monsieur Gerbois entertained the idea that he had suffered an enormous loss. There must have been a fortune concealed in a secret drawer, and that was the reason the young man had resorted to crime. "My poor father, what would we have done with that fortune?" asked Suzanne. "My child, with such a fortune you could make a most advantageous marriage." Suzanne sighed bitterly. Her aspirations soared no higher than her cousin Philippe, who was indeed a most deplorable object. And life in the little house at Versailles was not so happy and contented as of yore. 2 months passed away. Then came a succession of startling events, a strange blending of good luck and dire misfortune. On the 1st day of February, at 5:30, Monsieur Gerbois entered the house, carrying an evening paper, took a seat, put on his spectacles, and commenced to read. As politics did not interest him, he turned to the inside of the paper. Immediately his attention was attracted by an article entitled, "Third Drawing of the Press Association Lottery. Number 514, Series 23, draws $1 million." The newspaper slipped from his fingers. The walls swam before his eyes, and his heart ceased to beat. He held number 514, Series 23. He had purchased it from a friend to oblige him, without any thought of success, and behold, it was the lucky number. Quickly he took out his memorandum book. Yes, he was quite right. The number 514, Series 23 was written there on the inside of the cover. But the ticket? He rushed to his desk to find the envelope box in which he had placed the precious ticket, but the box was not there, and it suddenly occurred to him that it had not been there for several weeks. He heard footsteps on the gravel walk leading from the street. He called, "Suzanne! Suzanne!" She was returning from a walk. She entered hastily. He stammered in a choking voice, "Suzanne, the box of envelopes." "What box?" "The one I bought at the Louvre, one Saturday. It was at the end of that table." "Don't you remember, father? We put all those things away together."
"When?"
"The evening. You know, the same evening—"
"But where? Tell me quick. Where?"
"Where? Why, in the writing desk."
"In the writing desk that was stolen?"
"Yes."
"Oh, mon Dieu! In the stolen desk!"
He uttered the last sentence in a low voice, in a sort of stupor. Then he seized her hand, and in a still lower voice he said,
"It contained $1 million, my child."
"Ah, father, why didn't you tell me?" she murmured naively.
$1 million, he repeated. "It contained the ticket that drew the grand prize in the press lottery."
The colossal proportions of the disaster overwhelmed them, and for a long time they maintained a silence that they feared to break. At last Suzanne said, "But, father, they will pay you just the same."
"How? On what proof?"
"Must you have proof?"
"Of course."
"And you haven't any?"
"It was in the box."
"In the box that has disappeared?"
"Yes, and now the thief will get the money."
"Oh, that would be terrible, father. You must prevent it." For a moment he was silent. Then, in an outburst of energy, He leaped up, stamped on the floor, and exclaimed,
"No, no, he shall not have that million. He shall not have it. Why should he have it? Ah, clever as he is, he can do nothing. If he goes to claim the money, they will arrest him. Ah, now we will see, my fine fellow."
"What will you do, father?"
"Defend our just rights, whatever happens. And we will succeed. The 1,000,000 francs belong to me, and I intend to have them."
A few minutes later he sent this telegram: "Governor Crédit Foncier, Rue Capucins, Paris. Am holder of the number 514 series 23. Oppose by all legal means any other claimant. Gerbois." Almost at the same moment, the Crédit Foncier received the following telegram: "Number 514 series 23 is in my possession. Arsène Lupin." Every time I undertake to relate one of the many extraordinary adventures that mark the life of Arsène Lupin, I experience a feeling of embarrassment, as it seems to me that the most commonplace of those adventures is already well known to my readers. In fact, there is not a movement of our national thief, as he has been so aptly described, that has not been given the widest publicity, not an exploit that has been studied in all its phases, not an action that has not been discussed with that particularity usually reserved for the recital of heroic deeds. For instance, who does not know the strange history of the Blonde Lady, with those curious episodes which were proclaimed by the newspapers with heavy black headlines, as follows: "Lottery ticket number 514. The crime on the Avenue Henri Martin. The Blue Diamond." The interest created by the intervention of the celebrated English detective Herlock Sholmes, the excitement aroused by the various vicissitudes which marked the struggle between those famous artists. And what a commotion on the boulevards, the day on which the newsboys announced "Arrest of Arsène Lupin." My excuse for repeating these stories at this time is the fact that I produce the key to the enigma. Those adventures have always been enveloped in a certain degree of obscurity, which I now remove. I reproduce old newspaper articles, I relate old-time interviews, I present ancient letters, but I have arranged and classified all that material and reduced it to the exact truth. My collaborators in this work have been Arsène Lupin himself, and also the ineffable Wilson, the friend and confidant of Herlock Sholmes. Everyone will recall the tremendous burst of laughter which greeted the publication of those two telegrams. The name Arsène Lupin was in itself a stimulus to curiosity, a promise of amusement for the gallery, and in this case the gallery means the entire world. An investigation was immediately commenced by the Crédit Foncier, which established these facts: that ticket number 514 series 23 had been sold by the Versailles branch office of the lottery to an artillery officer named Bessy, who was afterward killed by a fall from his horse. Some time before his death he informed some of his comrades that he had transferred his ticket to a friend.
"And I am that friend," affirmed Monsieur Gerbois.
"Prove it," replied the governor of the Crédit Foncier.
"Of course I can prove it. 20 people can tell you that I was an intimate friend of Monsieur Bessy, and that we frequently met at the Café de la Place d'Armes. It was there one day I purchased the ticket from him for 20 francs, simply as an accommodation to him."
"Have you any witnesses to that transaction?"
"No."
"Well, how do you expect to prove it?"
"By a letter he wrote to me."
"What letter?"
"A letter that was pinned to the ticket."
"Produce it."
"It was stolen at the same time as the ticket." "Well, you must find it."
It was soon learned that Arsène Lupin had the letter. A short paragraph appeared in the Echo de France, which has the honor to be his official organ, and of which, it is said, he is one of the principal shareholders. The paragraph announced that Arsène Lupin had placed in the hands of Monsieur Detinan, his advocate and legal adviser, the letter that Monsieur Bessy had written to him personally. This announcement provoked an outburst of laughter. Arsène Lupin had engaged a lawyer. Arsène Lupin, conforming to the rules and customs of modern society, had appointed a legal representative in the person of a well-known member of the Parisian bar. Monsieur Detinan had never enjoyed the pleasure of meeting Arsène Lupin, a fact he deeply regretted, but he had actually been retained by that mysterious gentleman and felt greatly honored by the choice. He was prepared to defend the interests of his client to the best of his ability. He was pleased, even proud, to exhibit the letter of Monsieur Bessy, but, although it proved the transfer of the ticket, it did not mention the name of the purchaser. It was simply addressed to "My dear friend." "My dear friend, that is I," added Arsène Lupin, in a note attached to Monsieur Bessy's letter. "And the best proof of that fact is that I hold the letter." The swarm of reporters immediately rushed to see Monsieur Gerbois, who could only repeat, "My dear friend, that is I. Arsène Lupin stole the letter with the lottery ticket." "Let him prove it," retorted Lupin to the reporters. "He must have done it because he stole the writing desk," exclaimed Monsieur Gerbois before the same reporters. "Let him prove it," replied Lupin. Such was the entertaining comedy enacted by the two claimants of ticket number 514, and the calm demeanor of Arsène Lupin contrasted strangely with the nervous perturbation of poor Monsieur Gerbois. The newspapers were filled with the lamentations of that unhappy man. He announced his misfortune with pathetic candor. "Understand, gentlemen, it was Suzanne's dowry that the rascal stole. Personally, I don't care a straw for it, but for Suzanne! Just think of it, a whole million, 10 times 100,000 francs. Ah, I knew very well that the desk contained a treasure." It was in vain to tell him that his adversary, when stealing the desk, was unaware that the lottery ticket was in it, and that, in any event, he could not foresee that the ticket would draw the grand prize. He would reply, "Nonsense! Of course he knew it. Else why would he take the trouble to steal a poor miserable desk?" For some unknown reason, but certainly not for a small scrap of paper which was then worth only 20 francs. "1,000,000 francs! He knew it! He knows everything! Ah, you do not know him, the scoundrel! He hasn't robbed you of 1,000,000 francs!" The controversy would have lasted for a much longer time, but on the 12th day, Monsieur Gerbois received from Arsène Lupin a letter marked "Confidential," which read as follows: "Monsieur, the gallery is being amused at our expense. Do you not think it is time for us to be serious? The situation is this: I possess a ticket to which I have no legal right, and you have the legal right to a ticket you do not possess. Neither of us can do anything. You will not relinquish your rights to me, I will not deliver the ticket to you. Now what is to be done? I see only one way out of the difficulty. Let us divide the spoils. 500,000 for you, 500,000 for me. Is not that a fair division? In my opinion, it is an equitable solution, and an immediate one. I will give you 3 days' time to consider the proposition. On Thursday morning, I shall expect to read in the personal column of the Echo de France a discreet message addressed to M. Ars Lup, expressing in veiled terms your consent to my offer. By so doing, you will recover immediate possession of the ticket. Then you can collect the money and send me 500,000 in a manner that I will describe to you later. In case of your refusal, I shall resort to other measures to accomplish the same result. But, apart from the very serious annoyances that such obstinacy on your part will cause you, it will cost you 25,000 francs for supplementary expenses. Believe me, monsieur, I remain your devoted servant, Arsène Lupin." In a fit of exasperation, Monsieur Gerbois committed the grave mistake of showing that letter and allowing a copy of it to be taken. His indignation overcame his discretion. "Nothing! He shall have nothing!" he exclaimed before a crowd of reporters. "To divide my property with him? Never! Let him tear up the ticket if he wishes." "Yet 500,000 francs is better than nothing." "That is not the question. It is a question of my just right, and that right I will establish before the courts." "What, attack Arsène Lupin? That would be amusing." "No, but the Credit Foncier. They must pay me the 1,000,000 francs." "Without producing the ticket, or, at least, without proving that you bought it?"
That proof exists, since Arsène Lupin admits that he stole the writing desk."
"But will the word of Arsène Lupin carry any weight with the court?"
"No matter. I will fight it out."
The gallery shouted with glee, and wagers were freely made upon the result with the odds in favor of Lupin. On the following Thursday the personal column in the Echo de France was eagerly perused by the expectant public, but it contained nothing addressed to M. Ars Lup. Monsieur Gerbois had not replied to Arsène Lupin's letter. That was the declaration of war. That evening the newspapers announced the abduction of Mademoiselle Suzanne Gerbois. The most entertaining feature in what might be called the Arsène Lupin dramas is the comic attitude displayed by the Parisian police. Arsène Lupin talks, plans, writes, commands, threatens, and executes as if the police did not exist. They never figure in his calculations. And yet the police do their utmost. But what can they do against such a foe that scorns and ignores them? Suzanne had left the house at 20 minutes to 10. Such was the testimony of the servant. On leaving the college at 5 minutes past 10, her father did not find her at the place she was accustomed to wait for him. Consequently, whatever had happened must have occurred during the course of Suzanne's walk from the house to the college. 2 neighbors had met her about 300 yards from the house. A lady had seen, on the avenue, a young girl corresponding to Suzanne's description. No one else had seen her. Inquiries were made in all directions. The employees of the railways and street-car lines were questioned, but none of them had seen anything of the missing girl. However, at Ville d'Avray, they found a shopkeeper who had furnished gasoline to an automobile that had come from Paris on the day of the abduction. It was occupied by a blonde woman. Extremely blonde, said the witness. An hour later, the automobile again passed through Ville d'Avray on its way from Versailles to Paris. The shopkeeper declared that the automobile now contained a second woman who was heavily veiled. No doubt it was Suzanne Gerbois. The abduction must have taken place in broad daylight on a frequented street in the very heart of the town. How, and at what spot? Not a cry was heard, not a suspicious action had been seen. The shopkeeper described the automobile as a royal blue limousine of 24 horsepower made by the firm of Pugin & Company. Inquiries were then made at the Grand Garage, managed by Madame Bob Walthour, who made a specialty of abductions by automobile. It was learned that she had rented a Pugin limousine on that day to a blonde woman whom she had never seen before nor since.
"Who was the chauffeur?"
"A young man named Ernest, whom I had engaged only the day before. He came well recommended."
"Is he here now?"
"No, he brought back the machine, but I haven't seen him since," said Madame Bob Walthour.
"Do you know where we can find him?"
"You might see the people who recommended him to me. Here are the names." Upon inquiry it was learned that none of these people knew the man called Ernest. The recommendations were forged. Such was the fate of every clue followed by the police. It ended nowhere. The mystery remained unsolved. Monsieur Gerbois had not the strength or courage to wage such an unequal battle. The disappearance of his daughter crushed him. He capitulated to the enemy. A short announcement in the Echo de France proclaimed his unconditional surrender. 2 days later, Monsieur Gerbois visited the office of the Crédit Foncier and handed lottery ticket number 514, series 23, to the governor, who exclaimed with surprise,
"Ah, you have it! He has returned it to you." "It was mislaid, that is all," replied Monsieur Gerbois.
"But you pretended that it had been stolen."
"At first I thought it had, but here it is."
"We will require some evidence to establish your right to the ticket."
"Will the letter of the purchaser, Monsieur Bessy, be sufficient?"
"Yes, that will do."
"Here it is,"
said Monsieur Gerbois, producing the letter.
"Very well. Leave these papers with us. The rules of the lottery allow us 15 days' time to investigate your claim. I will let you know when to call for your money. I presume you desire, as much as I do, that this affair should be closed without further publicity." "Quite so."
Monsieur Gerbois and the governor henceforth maintained a discreet silence. But the secret was revealed in some way, for it was soon commonly known that Arsène Lupin had returned the lottery ticket to Monsieur Gerbois. The public received the news with astonishment and admiration. Certainly he was a bold gamester who thus threw upon the table a trump card of such importance as the precious ticket. But it was true. He still retained a trump card of equal importance. However, if the young girl should escape? If the hostage held by Arsène Lupin should be rescued? The police thought they had discovered the weak spot of the enemy, and now redoubled their efforts. Arsène Lupin, disarmed by his own act, crushed by the wheels of his own machination, deprived of every sou of the coveted million, public interest now centered in the camp of his adversary. But it was necessary to find Suzanne, and they did not find her, nor did she escape. Consequently, it must be admitted, Arsène Lupin had won the first hand. But the game was not yet decided. The most difficult point remained. Mademoiselle Gerbois is in his possession, and he will hold her until he receives 500,000 francs. But how and where will such an exchange be made? For that purpose a meeting must be arranged, and then what will prevent Monsieur Gerbois from warning the police, and, in that way, effecting the rescue of his daughter, and, at the same time, keeping his money? The professor was interviewed, but he was extremely reticent. His answer was, "I have nothing to say." "And Mademoiselle Gerbois?" "The search is being continued." "But Arsène Lupin has written to you?" "No." "Do you swear to that?" "No." "Then it is true. What are his instructions?" "I have nothing to say." Then the interviewers attacked Monsieur Detinan, and found him equally discreet. "Monsieur Lupin is my client, and I cannot discuss his affairs," he replied, with an affected air of gravity. These mysteries served to irritate the gallery. Obviously, some secret negotiations were in progress. Arsène Lupin had arranged and tightened the meshes of his net, while the police maintained a close watch, day and night, over Monsieur Gerbois. And the three and only possible dénouements, the arrest, the triumph, or the ridiculous and pitiful abortion, were freely discussed. But the curiosity of the public was only partially satisfied, and it was reserved for these pages to reveal the exact truth of the affair. On Monday, March 12th, Monsieur Gerbois received a notice from the Crédit Foncier. On Wednesday, he took the 1 o'clock train for Paris. At 2 o'clock, 1,000 banknotes of 1,000 francs each were delivered to him. Whilst he was counting them one by one, in a state of nervous agitation, that money, which represented Suzanne's ransom, a carriage containing 2 men stopped at the curb a short distance from the bank. One of the men had gray hair and an unusually shrewd expression which formed a striking contrast to his shabby make-up. It was Detective Ganimard, the relentless enemy of Arsène Lupin. Ganimard said to his companion, Folenfant, "In 5 minutes we will see our clever friend Lupin. Is everything ready?" "Yes." "How many men have we?" 8. 2 of them on bicycles." "Enough, but not too many. On no account must Gerbois escape us. If he does, it is all up. He will meet Lupin at the appointed place, give 500,000 in exchange for the girl, and the game will be over." "But why doesn't Gerbois work with us? That would be the better way, and he could keep all the money himself." "Yes, but he is afraid that if he deceives the other, he will not get his daughter." "What other?" "Lupin." Ganimard pronounced the word in a solemn tone, somewhat timidly, as if he were speaking of some supernatural creature whose claws he already felt. "It is very strange," remarked Folenfant judiciously, "that we are obliged to protect this gentleman contrary to his own wishes." "Yes, but Lupin always turns the world upside down," said Ganimard mournfully. A moment later, Monsieur Gerbois appeared and started up the street. At the end of the Rue des Capucins, he turned into the boulevards, walking slowly, and stopping frequently to gaze at the shop windows. "Much too calm, too self-possessed," said Ganimard. "A man with 1,000,000 in his pocket would not have that air of tranquillity." "What is he doing?" "Oh, nothing, evidently. But they have a suspicion that it is Lupin." "Yes, Lupin." At that moment, Monsieur Gerbois stopped at a newsstand, purchased a paper, unfolded it, and commenced to read it as he walked slowly away. A moment later he gave a sudden bound into an automobile that was standing at the curb. Apparently the machine had been waiting for him, as it started away rapidly, turned at the Madeleine, and disappeared.
"Nom de nom!" cried Ganimard. "That's one of his old tricks."
Ganimard hastened after the automobile around the Madeleine. Then he burst into laughter. At the entrance to the Boulevard Malesherbes, the automobile had stopped, and Monsieur Gerbois had alighted.
"Quick, Folenfant, the chauffeur! It may be the man Ernest."
Folenfant interviewed the chauffeur. His name was Gaston. He was an employee of the automobile cab company. 10 minutes ago a gentleman had engaged him and told him to wait near the newsstand for another gentleman. "And the second man, what address did he give?" asked Folenfant.
"No address. Boulevard Malesherbes, Avenue de Messine, double pourboire. That is all."
But during this time Monsieur Gerbois had leaped into the first passing carriage.
"To the Concorde station, Metropolitan,"
he said to the driver. He left the underground at the Place du Palais Royal, ran to another carriage, and ordered it to go to the Place de la Bourse. Then a second journey by the underground to the Avenue des Villiers, followed by a third carriage drive to number 25 Rue Clapeyron. Number 25 Rue Clapeyron is separated from the Boulevard des Batignolles by the house which occupies the angle formed by the two streets. He ascended to the first floor and rang. A gentleman opened the door.
"Does Monsieur Detinan live here?"
"Yes, that is my name. Are you Monsieur Gerbois?"
"Yes."
"I was expecting you. Step in." As Monsieur Gerbois entered the lawyer's office, the clock struck 3. He said:
"I am prompt to the minute. Is he here?"
"Not yet." Monsieur Gerbois took a seat, wiped his forehead, looked at his watch as if he did not know the time, and inquired anxiously:
"Will he come?"
"Well, monsieur," replied the lawyer, "that I do not know. I am quite as anxious and impatient as you are to find out. If he comes he will run a great risk, as this house has been closely watched for the last 2 weeks. They distrust me."
"They suspect me, too. I am not sure whether the detectives lost sight of me or not on my way here."
"But you were—"
"It wouldn't be my fault," cried the professor quickly. "You cannot reproach me. I promised to obey his orders, and I followed them to the very letter. I drew the money at the time fixed by him, and I came here in the manner directed by him. I have faithfully performed my part of the agreement. Let him do his."
After a short silence, he asked anxiously:
"He will bring my daughter, won't he?"
"I expect so."
"But you have seen him?"
"I? No, not yet. He made the appointment by letter, saying both of you would be here, and asking me to dismiss my servants before 3 o'clock and admit no one while you were here. If I would not consent to that arrangement, I was to notify him by a few words in the Echo de France, but I am only too happy to oblige Monsieur Lupin, and so I consented."
"Ah, how will this end?"
moaned Monsieur Gerbois. He took the banknotes from his pocket, placed them on the table, and divided them into 2 equal parts. Then the 2 men sat there in silence. From time to time Monsieur Gerbois would listen. Did someone ring? His nervousness increased every minute, and Monsieur Detinan also displayed considerable anxiety. At last the lawyer lost his patience. He rose abruptly and said:
"He will not come. We shouldn't expect it. It would be folly on his part. He would run too great a risk."
And Monsieur Gerbois, despondent, his hands resting on the banknotes, stammered:
"Oh, mon Dieu, I hope he will come. I would give the whole of that money to see my daughter again."
The door opened. "Half of it will be sufficient, Monsieur Gerbois." These words were spoken by a well-dressed young man, who now entered the room and was immediately recognized by Monsieur Gerbois as the person who had wished to buy the desk from him at Versailles. He rushed toward him.
"Where is my daughter? My Suzanne?"
Arsène Lupin carefully closed the door, and, while slowly removing his gloves, said to the lawyer: "My dear maître, I am indebted to you very much for your kindness in consenting to defend my interests. I shall not forget it." Monsieur Detinan murmured:
But you did not ring. I did not hear the door.
Doors and bells are things that should work without being heard. I am here, and that is the important point."
"My daughter! Suzanne! Where is she?"
repeated the professor. "Mon Dieu, monsieur," said Lupin, "what's your hurry? Your daughter will be here in a moment." Lupin walked to and fro for a minute. Then, with the pompous air of an orator, he said: "Monsieur Gerbois, I congratulate you on the clever way in which you made the journey to this place." Then, perceiving the 2 piles of banknotes, he exclaimed: "Ah, I see. The million is here. We will not lose any time. Permit me." "One moment," said the lawyer, placing himself before the table. "Mademoiselle Gerbois has not yet arrived." "Well?"
"Is not her presence indispensable?"
I understand. Arsène Lupin inspires only a limited confidence. He might pocket the 500,000 and not restore the hostage. Ah, monsieur, people do not understand me. Because I have been obliged, by force of circumstances, to commit certain actions a little out of the ordinary, my good faith is impugned. I, who have always observed the utmost scrupulosity and delicacy in business affairs. Besides, my dear monsieur, if you have any fear, open the window and call. There are at least a dozen detectives in the street."
"Do you think so?"
Arsène Lupin raised the curtain. "I think that Monsieur Gerbois could not throw Ganimard off the scent. What did I tell you? There he is now."
"Is it possible?"
exclaimed the professor. "But I swear to you—" "That you have not betrayed me? I do not doubt you, but those fellows are clever, sometimes. Ah! I can see Folenfant and Grom and Dieuzy, all good friends of mine." Monsieur Detinan looked at Lupin in amazement. What assurance! He laughed as merrily as if engaged in some childish sport, as if no danger threatened him. This unconcern reassured the lawyer more than the presence of the detectives. He left the table on which the banknotes were lying. Arsène Lupin picked up 1 pile of bills after the other, took from each of them 25 banknotes, which he offered to Monsieur Detinan, saying: "The reward of your services to Monsieur Gerbois and Arsène Lupin. You well deserve it." "You owe me nothing," replied the lawyer. "What? After all the trouble we have caused you?" "And all the pleasure you have given me." "That means, my dear monsieur, that you do not wish to accept anything from Arsène Lupin. See what it is to have a bad reputation." He then offered the 50,000 francs to Monsieur Gerbois, saying: "Monsieur, in memory of our pleasant interview, permit me to return you this as a wedding gift to Mademoiselle Gerbois." Monsieur Gerbois took the money, but said:
"My daughter will not marry."
"She will not marry if you refuse your consent, but she wishes to marry."
"What do you know about it?"
"I know that young girls often dream of such things unknown to their parents. Fortunately, there are sometimes good genii, like Arsène Lupin, who discover their little secrets in the drawers of their writing desks."
"Did you find anything else?" asked the lawyer. "I confess I am curious to know why you took so much trouble to get possession of that desk."
"On account of its historic interest, my friend. Although, despite the opinion of Monsieur Gerbois, the desk contained no treasure except the lottery ticket, and that was unknown to me. I had been seeking it for a long time. That writing desk of yew and mahogany was discovered in the little house in which Marie Walewska once lived in Boulogne, and on one of the drawers there is this inscription: 'Dedicated to Napoleon I, Emperor of the French, by his very faithful servant, Martian.' And above it these words engraved with the point of a knife: 'To you, Marie.' Afterwards Napoleon had a similar desk made for the Empress Josephine, so that the secretary that was so much admired at the Malmaison was only an imperfect copy of the one that will henceforth form part of my collection."
"Oh, If I had known when in the shop, I would gladly have given it up to you," said the professor.
Arsène Lupin smiled as he replied: "And you would have had the advantage of keeping for your own use lottery ticket number 514."
"And you would not have found it necessary to abduct my daughter."
"Abduct your daughter?"
"Yes."
"My dear monsieur, you are mistaken. Mademoiselle Gerbois was not abducted."
"No?"
"Certainly not. Abduction means force or violence, and I assure you that she served as hostage of her own free will."
"Of her own free will?"
repeated Monsieur Gerbois in amazement. "In fact, she almost asked to be taken. Why do you suppose that an intelligent young girl like Mademoiselle Gerbois, and who, moreover, nourishes an unacknowledged passion, would hesitate to do what was necessary to secure her dowry? Ah, I swear to you, it was not difficult to make her understand that it was the only way to overcome your obstinacy." Monsieur Detinan was greatly amused. He replied to Lupin: "But I should think it was more difficult to get her to listen to you. How did you approach her?" "Oh, I didn't approach her myself. I have not the honor of her acquaintance. A friend of mine, a lady, carried on the negotiations." "The blonde woman in the automobile, no doubt." "Precisely. All arrangements were made at the first interview near the college. Since then, Mademoiselle Gerbois and her new friend have been traveling in Belgium and Holland in a manner that should prove most pleasing and instructive to a young girl. She will tell you all about it herself." The bell of the vestibule door rang, 3 rings in quick succession, followed by 2 isolated rings. "It is she," said Lupin. "Monsieur Detinan, if you would be so kind." The lawyer hastened to the door. 2 young women entered. One of them threw herself into the arms of Monsieur Gerbois. The other approached Lupin. The latter was a tall woman of good figure, very pale complexion, and with blonde hair parted over her forehead in undulating waves that glistened and shone like the setting sun. She was dressed in black, with no display of jeweled ornaments, but on the contrary, her appearance indicated good taste and refined elegance. Arsène Lupin spoke a few words to her. Then, bowing to Mademoiselle Gerbois, he said: "I owe you an apology, mademoiselle, for all your troubles, but I hope you have not been too unhappy." "Unhappy? Why, I should have been very happy indeed if it hadn't been for leaving my poor father." "Then all is for the best. Kiss him again, and take advantage of the opportunity, it is an excellent one, to speak to him about your cousin." "My cousin? What do you mean? I don't understand." "Of course you understand. Your cousin Philippe, the young man whose letters you kept so carefully." Suzanne blushed, but, following Lupin's advice, she again threw herself into her father's arms. Lupin gazed upon them with a tender look. "Ah, such is my reward for a virtuous act. What a touching picture! A happy father and a happy daughter. And to know that their joy is your work, Lupin. Hereafter these people will bless you and reverently transmit your name unto their descendants, even unto the 4th generation. What a glorious reward, Lupin, for one act of kindness." He walked to the window. "Oh, is dear old Ganimard still waiting? He would like very much to be present at this charming domestic scene. Ah, he is not there. Nor any of the others. I don't see anyone. The deuce! The situation is becoming serious. I dare say they are already under their porte cochere, talking to the concierge perhaps, or even ascending the stairs." Monsieur Gerbois made a sudden movement. Now that his daughter had been restored to him, he saw the situation in a different light. To him, the arrest of his adversary meant 500,000 francs. Instinctively, he made a step forward. As if by chance, Lupin stood in his way. "Where are you going, Monsieur Gerbois? To defend me against them? Oh, that is very kind of you, but I assure you it is not necessary. They are more worried than I." Then he continued to speak with calm deliberation. "But, really, what do they know? That you are here, And perhaps that Mademoiselle Gerbois is here, for they may have seen her arrive with an unknown lady. But they do not imagine that I am here. How is it possible that I could be in a house that they ransacked from cellar to garret this morning? They suppose that the unknown lady was sent to me to make the exchange, and they will be ready to arrest her when she goes out." At that moment the bell rang. With a brusque movement, Lupin seized Monsieur Gerbois and said to him in an imperious tone: "Do not move. Remember your daughter and be prudent. Otherwise, as to you, Monsieur Detinan, I have your promise." Monsieur Gerbois was rooted to the spot. The lawyer did not stir. Without the least sign of haste, Lupin picked up his hat and brushed the dust off of it with his sleeve. "My dear Monsieur Detinan, if I can ever be of service to you, my best wishes, Mademoiselle Suzanne, and my kind regards to Monsieur Philippe." He drew a heavy gold watch from his pocket. "Monsieur Gerbois, it is now 42 minutes past 3. At 46 minutes past 3, I give you permission to leave this room. Not 1 minute sooner than 46 minutes past 3. "But they will force an entrance," suggested Monsieur Detinan. "You forget the law, my dear monsieur. Ganimard would never venture to violate the privacy of a French citizen. Oh, but pardon me. Time flies, and you are all slightly nervous." He placed his watch on the table, opened the door of the room, and addressing the blonde lady, he said: "Are you ready, my dear?" He drew back to let her pass, bowed respectfully to Mademoiselle Gerbois, and went out, closing the door behind him. Then they heard him in the vestibule, speaking in a loud voice: "Good day, Ganimard. How goes it? Remember me to Madame Ganimard. One of these days I shall invite her to breakfast. Au revoir, Ganimard." The bell rang violently, followed by repeated rings, and voices on the landing. 45 minutes, muttered Monsieur Gerbois. After a few seconds he left the room and stepped into the vestibule. Arsène Lupin and the blonde lady had gone. "Papa, you mustn't! Wait!" cried Suzanne. "Wait! You are foolish! No quarter for that rascal! And a $500,000?" He opened the outer door. Ganimard rushed in. "That woman! Where is she? And Lupin?" "He was here. He is here." Ganimard uttered a cry of triumph. "Ho, ho! We have him! The house is surrounded!" "But the servants' stairway?" suggested Monsieur Detinan. "It leads to the court," said Ganimard. "There is only one exit, the street door. 10 men are guarding it." "But he didn't come in by the street door, and he will not go out that way." "What way, then?" asked Ganimard. "Through the air?" He drew aside a curtain and exposed a long corridor leading to the kitchen. Ganimard ran along it and tried the door of the servants' stairway. It was locked. From the window he called to one of his assistants. "Seen anyone?" "No." "Then they are still in the house!" he exclaimed. "They are hiding in one of the rooms. They cannot have escaped. Ah, Lupin, you fooled me before, but this time I get my revenge." At 7 o'clock in the evening, Monsieur Dudonny, chief of the detective service, astonished at not receiving any news, visited the rue Clapeyron. He questioned the detectives who were guarding the house, then ascended to Monsieur Detinan's apartment. The lawyer led him into his room. There Monsieur Dudonny beheld a man, or rather 2 legs, kicking in the air, while the body to which they belonged was hidden in the depths of the chimney. "Ohé! Ohé!" gasped a stifled voice, and a more distant voice from on high replied, "Ohé! Ohé!" Monsieur Dudonny laughed and exclaimed: "Here, Ganimard, have you turned chimney-sweep?" The detective crawled out of the chimney. With his blackened face, his sooty clothes, and his feverish eyes, he was quite unrecognizable. "I am looking for him," he growled. "Who?" "Arsène Lupin and his friend." "Where do you suppose they are hiding in the chimney?" Ganimard arose, laid his sooty hand on the sleeve of his superior officer's coat, and exclaimed angrily:
Where do you think they are, Chief? They must be somewhere. They are flesh and blood like you and me and can't fade away like smoke.
No, but they have faded away just the same.
But how? How? The house is surrounded by our men, even on the roof.
What about the adjoining house?
There's no communication with it.
And the apartments on the other floors?
I know all the tenants. They have not seen anyone.
Are you sure you know all of them?
Yes! The concierge answers for them. Besides, as an extra precaution, I have placed a man in each apartment. They can't escape. If I don't get them tonight, I will get them tomorrow. I shall sleep here.
He slept there, that night and the 2 following nights. 3 days and nights passed away without the discovery of the irrepressible Lupin or his female companion. More than that, Ganimard did not unearth the slightest clue on which to base a theory to explain their escape. For that reason, he adhered to his first opinion.
There is no trace of their escape, therefore they are here.
It may be that, at the bottom of his heart, his conviction was less firmly established. But he would not confess it. No, 1,000 times no. A man and a woman could not vanish like the evil spirits in a fairy tale. And, without losing his courage, he continued his searches, as if he expected to find the fugitives concealed in some impenetrable retreat, or embodied in the stone walls of the house. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Arsène Lupin vs. Herlock Sholmes by Maurice Leblanc, translated by George Moorhead. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2 The Blue Diamond. On the evening of March 27, at No. 134 Avenue Henri Martin, in the house that he had inherited from his brother 6 months before, the old General Baron d'Autrec, ambassador at Berlin under the Second Empire, was asleep in a comfortable armchair, while his secretary was reading to him, and the Sister Auguste was warming his bed and preparing the night lamp. At 11 o'clock, the sister, who was obliged to return to the convent of her order at that hour, said to the secretary, "Mademoiselle Antoinette, my work is finished. I am going." "Very well, sister." "Do not forget that the cook is away, and that you are alone in the house with the servant." "Have no fear for the baron. I sleep in the adjoining room and always leave the door open." The sister left the house. A few moments later, Charles, the servant, came to receive his orders. The baron was now awake, and spoke for himself.
"The usual orders, Charles. See that the electric bell rings in your room, and, at the first alarm, run for the doctor. Now, Mademoiselle Antoinette, how far did we get in our reading?"
"Is monsieur not going to bed now?"
No, I will go later. Besides, I don't need anyone."
20 minutes later, he was sleeping again, and Antoinette crept away on tiptoe. At that moment, Charles was closing the shutters on the lower floor. In the kitchen, he bolted the door leading to the garden, and, in the vestibule, he not only locked the door but hooked the chain as well. Then he ascended to his room on the 3rd floor, went to bed, and was soon asleep. Probably an hour had passed, when he leaped from his bed in alarm. The bell was ringing. It rang for some time, 7 or 8 seconds perhaps, without intermission.
"Well,"
muttered Charles, recovering his wits,
"another of the baron's whims."
He dressed himself quickly, descended the stairs, stopped in front of the door, and rapped, according to his custom. He received no reply. He opened the door and entered.
"Ah, no light," he murmured. "What is that for?"
Then, in a low voice, he called,
"Mademoiselle?"
No reply.
"Are you there, mademoiselle? What's the matter? Is Monsieur le Baron ill?"
No reply. Nothing but a profound silence that soon became depressing. He took 2 steps forward. His foot struck a chair, and, having touched it, he noticed that it was overturned. Then, with his hand, he discovered other objects on the floor, a small table and a screen. Anxiously, he approached the wall, felt for the electric button, and turned on the light. In the center of the room, between the table and dressing case, lay the body of his master, the Baron d'Hautrec.
"What? It can't be possible!"
he stammered. He could not move. He stood there with bulging eyes, gazing stupidly at the terrible disorder, the overturned chairs, a large crystal candelabra shattered in 1,000 pieces, the clock lying on the marble hearthstone, all evidence of a fearful and desperate struggle. The handle of a stiletto glittered, not far from the corpse. The blade was stained with blood. A handkerchief, marked with red spots, was lying on the edge of the bed. Charles recoiled with horror. The body lying at his feet extended itself for a moment, then shrunk up again. 2 or 3 tremors, and that was the end. He stooped over the body. There was a clean-cut wound on the neck from which the blood was flowing and then congealing in a black pool on the carpet. The face retained an expression of extreme terror.
"Someone has killed him," he muttered. "Someone has killed him."
Then he shuddered at the thought that there might be another dreadful crime. Did not the Baron's secretary sleep in the adjoining room? Had not the assassin killed her also? He opened the door. The room was empty. He concluded that Antoinette had been abducted, or else she had gone away before the crime. He returned to the Baron's chamber, his glance falling on the secretary. He noticed that article of furniture remained intact. Then he saw upon a table, beside a bunch of keys and a pocket-book that the Baron placed there every night, a handful of golden louis. Charles seized the pocket-book, opened it, and found some bank-notes. He counted them. There were 13 notes of 100 francs each. Instinctively, mechanically, he put the bank-notes in his pocket, rushed down the stairs, drew the bolt, unhooked the chain, closed the door behind him, and fled to the street. Charles was an honest man. He had scarcely left the gate when, cooled by the night air and the rain, he came to a sudden halt. Now he saw his action in its true light, and it filled him with horror. He hailed a passing cab, and said to the driver,
"Go to the police office, and bring the commissary. Hurry! There has been a murder in that house."
The cab driver whipped his horse. Charles wished to return to the house, but found the gate locked. He had closed it himself when he came out, and it could not be opened from the outside. On the other hand, it was useless to ring, as there was no one in the house. It was almost an hour before the arrival of the police. When they came, Charles told his story and handed the bank-notes to the commissary. A locksmith was summoned, and, after considerable difficulty, he succeeded in forcing open the garden gate and the vestibule door. The commissary of police entered the room first, but immediately turned to Charles and said,
"You told me that the room was in the greatest disorder."
Charles stood at the door, amazed, bewildered. All the furniture had been restored to its accustomed place. The small table was standing between the 2 windows, the chairs were upright, and the clock was on the center of the mantel. The debris of the candelabra had been removed.
"Where is Monsieur le Baron?"
stammered Charles.
"That's so," exclaimed the officer. "Where is the victim?"
He approached the bed and drew aside a large sheet, under which reposed the Baron d'Hautrec, formerly French ambassador at Berlin. Over him lay his military coat, adorned with the Cross of Honor. His features were calm. His eyes were closed.
"Someone has been here," said Charles. "How did they get in?" "I don't know, but someone has been here during my absence. There was a stiletto on the floor, there, and a handkerchief, stained with blood, on the bed. They are not here now. They have been carried away, and someone has put the room in order." "Who would do that?" "The assassin. But we found all the doors locked. He must have remained in the house. Then he must be here yet, as you were in front of the house all the time."
Charles reflected a moment, then said slowly,
"Yes, of course. I didn't go away from the gate."
"Who was the last person you saw with the Baron?"
"Mademoiselle Antoinette, his secretary."
"What has become of her?"
"I don't know. Her bed wasn't occupied, so she must have gone out.
I am not surprised at that, as she is young and pretty." "But how could she leave the house?"
"By the door,"
said Charles. "But you had bolted and chained it." "Yes, but she must have left before that." "And the crime was committed after her departure?" "Of course," said the servant. The house was searched from cellar to garret, but the assassin had fled. How? And when? Was it he or an accomplice who had returned to the scene of the crime and removed everything that might furnish a clue to his identity? Such were the questions the police were called upon to solve. The coroner came at 7 o'clock, and at 8 o'clock, Monsieur Dudouis, the head of the detective service, arrived on the scene. They were followed by the procureur of the Republic and the investigating magistrate. In addition to these officials, the house was overrun with policemen, detectives, newspaper reporters, photographers, and relatives and acquaintances of the murdered man. A thorough search was made. They studied out the position of the corpse according to the information furnished by Charles. They questioned Sister Auguste when she arrived, but they discovered nothing new. Sister Auguste was astonished to learn of the disappearance of Antoinette Bréhat. She had engaged the young girl 12 days before on excellent recommendations, and refused to believe that she would neglect her duty by leaving the house during the night. "But you see, she hasn't returned yet," said the magistrate, "and we are still confronted with the question, what has become of her?" "I think she was abducted by the assassin," said Charles. The theory was plausible, and was borne out by certain facts. Monsieur Dudouis agreed with it. He said, "Abducted? Ma foi, that is not improbable."
"Not only improbable," said the voice, "but absolutely opposed to the facts. There is not a particle of evidence to support such a theory."
The voice was harsh, the accent sharp, and no one was surprised to learn that the speaker was Ganimard. In no one else would they tolerate such a domineering tone. "Ah, it is you, Ganimard!" exclaimed Monsieur Dudouis. "I had not seen you before."
"I have been here since 2 o'clock."
"So, you are interested in some things outside of lottery ticket number 514, the affair of the Rue Clapeyron, the blonde lady, and Arsène Lupin?"
"Ha ha!"
laughed the veteran detective.
"I will not say that Lupin is a stranger to the present case. But let us forget the affair of the lottery ticket for a few moments, and try to unravel this new mystery."
Ganimard is not one of those celebrated detectives whose methods will create a school, or whose name will be immortalized in the criminal annals of his country. He is devoid of those flashes of genius which characterize the work of Dupin, Lecoq, and Sherlock Holmes. Yet it must be admitted he possesses superior qualities of observation, sagacity, perseverance, and even intuition. His merit lies in his absolute independence. Nothing troubles or influences him, except, perhaps, a sort of fascination that Arsène Lupin holds over him. However that may be, there is no doubt that his position on that morning, in the house of the late Baron d'Hautrec, was one of undoubted superiority, and his collaboration in the case was appreciated and desired by the investigating magistrate.
"In the first place," said Ganimard, "I will ask Monsieur Charles to be very particular on one point. He says that, on the occasion of his first visit to the room, various articles of furniture were overturned and strewn about the place. Now I ask him whether, on his second visit to the room, he found all those articles restored to their accustomed places. I mean, of course, correctly placed."
"Yes, all in their proper places," replied Charles.
"It is obvious, then, that the person who replaced them must have been familiar with the location of those articles."
The logic of this remark was apparent to his hearers. Ganimard continued.
"One more question, Monsieur Charles. You were awakened by the ringing of your bell. Now who, do you think, rang it?"
"Monsieur le Baron, of course."
"When could he ring it?"
"After the struggle, when he was dying."
"Impossible! Because you found him lying unconscious at a point more than 4 meters from the bell button."
"Then he must have rung during the struggle."
"Impossible!"
declared Ganimard.
"Since the ringing, as you have said, was continuous and uninterrupted, and lasted 7 or 8 seconds.
Do you think his antagonist would have permitted him to ring the bell in that leisurely manner?
Well, then it was before the attack.
Also quite impossible, since you have told us that the lapse of time between the ringing of the bell and your entrance to the room was not more than 3 minutes. Therefore, if the Baron rang before the attack, we are forced to the conclusion that the struggle, the murder, and the flight of the assassin all occurred within the short space of 3 minutes. I repeat, that is impossible.
And yet, said the magistrate, someone rang. If it were not the Baron, who was it?
The murderer.
For what purpose?
I do not know. But the fact that he did ring proves that he knew that the bell communicated with the servant's room. Now, who would know that, except an inmate of the house?
Ganimard was drawing the meshes of his net closer and tighter. In a few clear and logical sentences he had unfolded and defined his theory of the crime, so that it seemed quite natural when the magistrate said, "As I understand it, Ganimard, you suspect the girl Antoinette Bréhat."
"I do not suspect her, I accuse her."
"You accuse her of being an accomplice?"
"I accuse her of having killed Baron d'Hautrec."
"Nonsense! What proof have you?"
"The handful of hair I found in the right hand of the victim."
He produced the hair. It was of a beautiful blonde color, and glittered like threads of gold. Charles looked at it and said, "That is Mademoiselle Antoinette's hair. There can be no doubt of it. And then, there is another thing. I believe that the knife, which I saw on my first visit to the room, belonged to her. She used it to cut the leaves of books." A long, dreadful silence followed, as if the crime had acquired an additional horror by reason of having been committed by a woman. At last the magistrate said, "Let us assume, until we are better informed, that the Baron was killed by Antoinette Bréhat. We have yet to learn where she concealed herself after the crime, how she managed to return after Charles left the house, and how she made her escape after the arrival of the police. Have you formed any opinion on those points, Ganimard?"
"None."
"Well, then, where do we stand?" Ganimard was embarrassed. Finally, with a visible effort, he said,
"All I can say is that I find in this case the same method of procedure as we found in the affair of the lottery ticket number 514, the same phenomena, which might be termed the faculty of disappearing. Antoinette Bréhat has appeared and disappeared in this house as mysteriously as Arsène Lupin entered the house of Monsieur Detinan and escaped therefrom in the company of the blonde lady."
"Does that signify anything?"
"It does to me. I can see a probable connection between those two strange incidents. Antoinette Bréhat was hired by Sister Auguste 12 days ago, that is to say, on the day after the blonde lady so cleverly slipped through my fingers. In the second place, the hair of the blonde lady was exactly of the same brilliant golden hue as the hair found in this case."
"So that, in your opinion, Antoinette Bréhat
is the blonde lady, precisely."
"And that Lupin had a hand in both cases?"
"Yes, that is my opinion."
This statement was greeted with an outburst of laughter. It came from Monsieur Dudouis.
"Lupin! Always Lupin! Lupin is into everything! Lupin is everywhere!" "Yes, Lupin is into everything of any consequence,"
replied Ganimard, vexed at the ridicule of his superior.
"Well, so far as I see," observed Monsieur Dudouis, "you have not discovered any motive for this crime. The secretary was not broken into, nor the pocket-book carried away. Even a pile of gold was left upon the table." "Yes, that is so," exclaimed Ganimard. "But the famous diamond?"
"What diamond?"
"The blue diamond. The celebrated diamond which formed part of the royal crown of France, and which was given by the Duc d'Aumale to Leonide Lebrun, and at the death of Leonide Lebrun was purchased by the Baron d'Autrec as a souvenir of the charming comedienne that he had loved so well. That is one of those things that an old Parisian like I does not forget."
"It is obvious that if the blue diamond is not found, the motive for the crime is disclosed," said the magistrate. "But where should we search for it?"
"On the Baron's finger," replied Charles. "He always wore the blue diamond on his left hand." "I saw that hand, and there was only a plain gold ring on it," said Ganimard, as he approached the corpse. "Look in the palm of the hand," replied the servant.
Ganimard opened the stiffened hand. The bezel was turned inward, and in the center of that bezel the blue diamond shone with all its glorious splendor.
"The deuce!" muttered Ganimard, absolutely amazed. "I don't understand it."
"You will now apologize to Lupin for having suspected him, eh?" said Monsieur Dudouis, laughing. Ganimard paused for a moment's reflection, and then replied sententiously,
"It is only when I do not understand things that I suspect Arsène Lupin."
Such were the facts established by the police on the day after the commission of that mysterious crime. Facts that were vague and incoherent in themselves, and which were not explained by any subsequent discoveries. The movements of Antoinette Bréhat remained as inexplicable as those of the blonde lady, and the police discovered no trace of that mysterious creature with the golden hair who had killed Baron d'Autrec, and had failed to take from his finger the famous diamond that had once shone in the royal crown of France. The heirs of the Baron d'Autrec could not fail to benefit by such notoriety. They established in the house an exhibition of the furniture and other objects which were to be sold at the auction rooms of Drouot and Company. Modern furniture of indifferent taste, various objects of no artistic value, but in the center of the room, in a case of purple velvet, protected by a glass globe and guarded by 2 officers, was the famous blue diamond ring. A large magnificent diamond of incomparable purity, and of that indefinite blue which the clear water receives from an unclouded sky, of that blue which can be detected in the whiteness of linen. Some admired, some enthused, and some looked with horror on the chamber of the victim, on the spot where the corpse had lain, on the floor divested of its blood-stained carpet, and especially the walls, the unsurmountable walls over which the criminal must have passed. Some assured themselves that the marble mantel did not move. Others imagined gaping holes, mouths of tunnels, secret connections with the sewers and the catacombs. The sale of the blue diamond took place at the salesroom of Drouot and Company. The place was crowded to suffocation, and the bidding was carried to the verge of folly. The sale was attended by all those who usually appear at similar events in Paris, those who buy, and those who make a pretense of being able to buy. Bankers, brokers, artists, women of all classes, 2 cabinet ministers, an Italian tenor, an exiled king who, in order to maintain his credit, bid with much ostentation, and in a loud voice, as high as 100,000 francs. 100,000 francs! He could offer that sum without any danger of his bid being accepted. The Italian tenor risked 150,000, and a member of the Comédie Française bid 175,000 francs. When the bidding reached 200,000 francs, the smaller competitors fell out of the race. At 250,000, only 2 bidders remained in the field: Hirschman, the well-known capitalist, the king of gold mines, and the Countess de Crozon, the wealthy American, whose collection of diamonds and precious stones is famed throughout the world. 260,000, 270,000, 75, 80, exclaimed the auctioneer, as he glanced at the 2 competitors in succession. 280,000 for Madame. Do I hear any more? 300,000, said Hirschman. There was a short silence. The Countess was standing, smiling, but pale from excitement. She was leaning against the back of the chair in front of her. She knew, and so did everyone present, that the issue of the duel was certain. Logically, inevitably, it must terminate to the advantage of the capitalist, who had untold millions with which to indulge his caprices. However, the Countess made another bid. 305,000. Another silence. All eyes were now directed to the capitalist in the expectation that he would raise the bidding. But Hirschman was not paying any attention to the sale. His eyes were fixed on a sheet of paper which he held in his right hand, while the other hand held a torn envelope. 305,000, repeated the auctioneer. Once. Twice. For the last time. Do I hear any more? Once. Twice. Am I offered any more? Last chance. Hirschman did not move. Third and last time. Sold, exclaimed the auctioneer, as his hammer fell. 400,000! cried Hirschman, starting up as if the sound of the hammer had roused him from his stupor. Too late. The auctioneer's decision was irrevocable. Some of Hirschman's acquaintances pressed around him. What was the matter? Why did he not speak sooner? He laughed and said, Ma foi, I simply forgot, in a moment of abstraction. That is strange. You see, I just received a letter. And that letter was sufficient to distract my attention? Yes, for a moment. Ganimard was there. He had come to witness the sale of the ring. He stopped one of the attendants of the auction room and said, Was it you who carried the letter to Monsieur Hirschman? Yes. Who gave it to you? A lady. Where is she? Where is she? She was sitting down there. The lady who wore a thick veil. She has gone? Yes, just this moment. Ganimard hastened to the door, and saw the lady descending the stairs. He ran after her. A crush of people delayed him at the entrance. When he reached the sidewalk, she had disappeared. He returned to the auction room, accosted Hirschman, introduced himself, and inquired about the letter. Hirschman handed it to him. It was carelessly scribbled in pencil, in a handwriting unknown to the capitalist, and contained these few words: The blue diamond brings misfortune. Remember the Baron d'Hautrec. The vicissitudes of the blue diamond were not yet at an end. Although it had become well known through the murder of the Baron d'Hautrec and the incidents at the auction rooms, it was 6 months later that it attained even greater celebrity. During the following summer, the Countess de Crozon was robbed of the famous jewel she had taken so much trouble to acquire. Let me recall that strange affair, of which the exciting and dramatic incidents sent a thrill through all of us, and over which I am now permitted to throw some light. On the evening of August 10th, the guests of the Count and Countess de Crozon were assembled in the drawing-room of the magnificent chateau which overlooks the Baie de Somme. To entertain her friends, the Countess seated herself at the piano to play for them, after first placing her jewels on a small table near the piano, and, amongst them, was the ring of the Baron d'Hautrec. An hour later, the Count and the majority of the guests retired, including his 2 cousins and Madame de Réal, an intimate friend of the Countess. The latter remained in the drawing-room with Herr Bleichen, the Austrian consul, and his wife. They conversed for a time, and then the Countess extinguished the large lamp that stood on a table in the center of the room. At the same moment, Herr Bleichen extinguished the 2 piano lamps. There was a momentary darkness. Then the consul lighted a candle, and the 3 of them retired to their rooms. But as soon as she reached her apartment, the Countess remembered her jewels and sent her maid to get them. When the maid returned with the jewels, she placed them on the mantel without the Countess looking at them. Next day, Madame de Crozon found that one of her rings was missing. It was the blue diamond ring. She informed her husband, and, after talking it over, they reached the conclusion that the maid was above suspicion, and that the guilty party must be Herr Bleichen. The Count notified the commissary of police at Amiens, who commenced an investigation and, discreetly, exercised a strict surveillance over the Austrian consul to prevent his disposing of the ring. The chateau was surrounded by detectives day and night. 2 weeks passed without incident. Then Herr Bleichen announced his intended departure. That day a formal complaint was entered against him. The police made an official examination of his luggage. In a small satchel, the key to which was always carried by the consul himself, they found a bottle of dentifrice, and in that bottle they found the ring. Madame Bleichen fainted. Her husband was placed under arrest. Everyone will remember the line of defense adopted by the accused man. He declared that the ring must have been placed there by the Count de Crozon as an act of revenge. He said,
"The Count is brutal and makes his wife very unhappy. She consulted me, and I advised her to get a divorce. The Count heard of it in some way, and, to be revenged on me, he took the ring and placed it in my satchel."
The Count and Countess persisted in pressing the charge. Between the explanation which they gave and that of the consul, both equally possible and equally probable, the public had to choose. No new fact was discovered to turn the scale in either direction. A month of gossip, conjectures, and investigations failed to produce a single ray of light. Wearied of the excitement and notoriety, and incapable of securing the evidence necessary to sustain their charge against the consul, the Count and Countess at last sent to Paris for a detective competent to unravel the tangled threads of this mysterious skein. This brought Ganimard into the case. For 4 days the veteran detective searched the house from top to bottom, examined every foot of the ground, had long conferences with the maid, the chauffeur, the gardeners, the employees in the neighboring post offices, visited the rooms that had been occupied by the various guests. Then one morning he disappeared without taking leave of his host or hostess. But a week later they received this telegram: "Please come to the Japanese tea room, Rue Boissy d'Anglais, tomorrow, Friday, evening at 5 o'clock. Ganimard." At 5 o'clock Friday evening their automobile stopped in front of number 9 Rue Boissy d'Anglais. The old detective was standing on the sidewalk, waiting for them. Without a word he conducted them to the first floor of the Japanese tea room. In one of the rooms they met 2 men, whom Ganimard introduced in these words:
"Monsieur Gerbois, professor in the College of Versailles, from whom, you'll remember, Arsène Lupin stole $500,000. Monsieur Léonce d'Autrec, nephew and sole legatee of the Baron d'Autrec."
A few minutes later another man arrived. It was Monsieur Dudois, head of the detective service, and he appeared to be in a particularly bad temper. He bowed and then said:
"What's the trouble now, Ganimard? I received your telephone message asking me to come here. Is it anything of consequence?" "Yes, Chief, it is a very important matter. Within an hour the last 2 cases to which I was assigned will have their denouement here. It seemed to me that your presence was indispensable." "And also the presence of Dieuzy and Folenfant, whom I noticed standing near the door as I came in?" "Yes, Chief."
"For what? Are you going to make an arrest, and you wish to do it with a flourish? Come, Ganimard, I am anxious to hear about it." Ganimard hesitated a moment, then spoke with the obvious intention of making an impression on his hearers.
"In the first place, I wish to state that Herr Bleichen had nothing to do with the theft of the ring."
Oh, exclaimed Monsieur Dudois. "That is a bold statement, and a very serious one."
"And is that all you have discovered?" asked the Count de Crozon. "Not at all. On the 2nd day after the theft, 3 of your guests went on an automobile trip as far as Crécy. 2 of them visited the famous battlefield, and while they were there, the 3rd party paid a hasty visit to the post office and mailed a small box, tied and sealed according to the regulations, and declared its value to be 100 francs.
"I see nothing strange in that," said the Count.
"Perhaps you will see something strange in it when I tell you that this person, in place of giving her true name, sent the box under the name of Rousseau, and the person to whom it was addressed, a certain Monsieur Belleau of Paris, moved his place of residence immediately after receiving the box, in other words, the ring."
"I presume you refer to one of my cousins d'Andelle?"
"No,"
replied Ganimard. "Madame de Réal, then?"
"Yes."
"You accuse my friend, Madame de Réal?" cried the Countess, shocked and amazed.
"I wish to ask you one question, madame," said Ganimard. "Was Madame de Réal present when you purchased the ring?"
"Yes, but we did not go there together."
"Did she advise you to buy the ring?"
The Countess considered for a moment, then said: "Yes, I think she mentioned it first."
"Thank you, madame. Your answer establishes the fact that it was Madame de Réal who was the first to mention the ring, and it was she who advised you to buy it."
"But I consider my friend is quite incapable—"
"Pardon me, Countess. when I remind you that Madame de Réal is only a casual acquaintance and not your intimate friend, as the newspapers have announced. It was only last winter that you met her for the first time. Now I can prove that everything she has told you about herself, her past life, and her relatives is absolutely false. That Madame Blanche de Réal had no actual existence before she met you, and she has now ceased to exist."
"Well?"
"Well," replied Ganimard.
"Your story is a very strange one," said the Countess, "but it has no application to our case. If Madame de Réal had taken the ring, how do you explain the fact that it was found in Herr Bleichen's tooth powder? Anyone who would take the risk and trouble of stealing the blue diamond would certainly keep it. What do you say to that?"
Nothing. But Madame de Réal will answer it."
"Oh, she does exist, then?"
"She does, and does not. I will explain in a few words. 3 days ago, while reading a newspaper, I glanced over the list of hotel arrivals at Trouville, and there I read Hotel Beau Rivage, Madame de Réal, etc. I went to Trouville immediately and interviewed the proprietor of the hotel. From the description and other information I received from him, I concluded that she was the very Madame de Réal that I was seeking, but she had left the hotel, giving her address in Paris as number 3 Rue des Colisées. The day before yesterday I went to that address and learned that there was no person there called Madame de Réal, but there was a Madame Réal living on the 2nd floor, who acted as a diamond broker and was frequently away from home. She had returned from a journey on the preceding evening. Yesterday I called on her, and under an assumed name I offered to act as an intermedium in the sale of some diamonds to certain wealthy friends of mine. She is to meet me here, today, to carry out that arrangement."
"What? You expect her to come here?"
"Yes, at 5:30.
"Are you sure it is she?"
"Madame de Réal of the Château de Crozon? Certainly. I have convincing evidence of that fact. But, listen. I hear Folenfant's signal."
It was a whistle. Ganimard arose quickly.
"There is no time to lose. Monsieur and Madame de Crozon, will you be kind enough to go into the next room? You also, Monsieur d'Hautrec, and you, Monsieur Gerbois. The door will remain open, and when I give the signal you will come out. Of course, Chief, you will remain here."
"We may be disturbed by other people," said Monsieur Dudouis.
"No, this is a new establishment, and the proprietor is one of my friends. He will not let anyone disturb us, except the blonde lady."
"The blonde lady? What do you mean?"
"Yes, the blonde lady herself, Chief, the friend and accomplice of Arsène Lupin, the mysterious blonde lady against whom I hold convincing evidence. But in addition to that, I wish to confront her with all the people she has robbed."
He looked through the window.
"I see her. She's coming in the door now. She can't escape. Folenfant and Dieuzy are guarding the door. The blonde lady is captured at last, Chief."
A moment later a woman appeared at the door. She was tall and slender, with a very pale complexion and bright golden hair. Ganimard trembled with excitement. He could not move nor utter a word. She was there, in front of him, at his mercy. What a victory over Arsène Lupin, and what a revenge! And, at the same time, the victory was such an easy one that he asked himself if the blonde lady would not yet slip through his fingers by one of those miracles that usually terminated the exploits of Arsène Lupin. She remained standing near the door, surprised at the silence, and looked about her without any display of suspicion or fear.
"She will get away. She will disappear,"
thought Ganimard. Then he managed to get between her and the door. She turned to go out.
"No, no," he said. "Why are you going away?"
"Really, monsieur, I do not understand what this means. Allow me—"
"There is no reason why you should go, madame, and very good reasons why you should remain."
"But—"
"It is useless, madame. You cannot go."
Trembling, she sat on a chair and stammered. What is it you want?" Ganimard had won the battle and captured the blonde lady. He said to her,
"Allow me to present the friend I mentioned, who desires to purchase some diamonds. Have you procured the stones you promised to bring?"
No, No, I don't know. I don't remember.
Come, jog your memory. A person of your acquaintance intended to send you a tinted stone, something like the blue diamond, I said, laughing, and you replied, 'Exactly, I expect to have just what you want. Do you remember?'
She made no reply. A small satchel fell from her hand. She picked it up quickly and held it securely. Her hands trembled slightly.
"Come," said Ganimard. "I see you have no confidence in us, Madame de Réal. I shall set you a good example by showing you what I have."
He took from his pocket-book a paper which he unfolded, and disclosed a lock of hair.
"These are a few hairs torn from the head of Antoinette Bréhat by the Baron d'Autrec, which I found clasped in his dead hand. I have shown them to Mademoiselle Gerbois, who declares they are of the exact color of the hair of the blonde lady. Besides, they are exactly the color of your hair, the identical color."
Madame Réal looked at him in bewilderment, as if she did not understand his meaning. He continued:
"And here are 2 perfume bottles, without labels, it is true, and empty, but still sufficiently impregnated with their odor to enable Mademoiselle Gerbois to recognize in them the perfume used by that blonde lady who was her traveling companion for 2 weeks. Now, one of these bottles was found in the room that Madame de Réal occupied at the Château de Crozon, and the other in the room that you occupied at the Hôtel Beau Rivage."
"What do you say? The blonde lady? The Château de Crozon?" The detective did not reply. He took from his pocket and placed on the table side by side 4 small sheets of paper. Then he said:
"I have, on these 4 pieces of paper, various specimens of handwriting. The first is the writing of Antoinette Bréhat. The second was written by the woman who sent the note to Baron Hirschman at the auction sale of the blue diamond. The third is that of Madame de Réal, written while she was stopping at the Château de Crozon. And the fourth is your handwriting, madame. It is your name and address, which you gave to the porter of the Hôtel Beau Rivage at Trouville. Now, compare the 4 handwritings. They are identical."
"What absurdity is this? Really, monsieur, I do not understand. What does it mean?"
"It means, madame," exclaimed Ganimard, "that the blonde lady, the friend and accomplice of Arsène Lupin, is none other than you, Madame Réal."
Ganimard went to the adjoining room and returned with Monsieur Gerbois, whom he placed in front of Madame Réal, as he said:
"Monsieur Gerbois, is this the person who abducted your daughter, the woman you saw at the house of Monsieur Detinan?"
"No."
Ganimard was so surprised that he could not speak for a moment. Finally he said:
"No? You must be mistaken."
"I am not mistaken. Madame is blonde, it is true, and in that respect resembles the blonde lady, but in all other respects she is totally different."
"I can't believe it. You must be mistaken."
Ganimard called in his other witnesses.
"Monsieur d'Autrec," he said, "do you recognize Antoinette Bréhat?"
"No, this is not the person I saw at my uncle's house."
"This woman is not Madame de Réal," declared the Count de Crozon. That was the finishing touch. Ganimard was crushed. He was buried beneath the ruins of the structure he had erected with so much care and assurance. His pride was humbled, his spirit was broken, by the force of this unexpected blow. Monsieur Dudouis arose and said: "We owe you an apology, madame, for this unfortunate mistake. But since your arrival here, I have noticed your nervous agitation. Something troubles you. May I ask what it is?" "Mon Dieu, monsieur, I was afraid. My satchel contains diamonds to the value of 100,000 francs, and the conduct of your friend was rather suspicious."
"But you were frequently absent from Paris. How do you explain that?"
"I make frequent journeys to other cities in the course of my business, that is all." Monsieur Dudouis had nothing more to ask. He turned to his subordinate and said:
"Your investigation has been very superficial, Ganimard, and your conduct toward this lady is really deplorable.
You will come to my office tomorrow and explain it."
The interview was at an end, and Monsieur Dudouis was about to leave the room when a most annoying incident occurred. Madame Réal turned to Ganimard and said: "I understand that you are Monsieur Ganimard. Am I right?"
"Yes."
"Then this letter must be for you. I received it this morning. It was addressed to Monsieur Justin Ganimard, care of Madame Réal. I thought it was a joke, because I did not know you under that name, but it appears that your unknown correspondent knew of our rendezvous." Ganimard was inclined to put the letter in his pocket unread, but he dared not do so in the presence of his superior, so he opened the envelope and read the letter aloud in an almost inaudible tone.
"Once upon a time there was a blonde lady, a Lupin, and a Ganimard. Now the wicked Ganimard had evil designs on the pretty blonde lady, and the good Lupin was her friend and protector. When the good Lupin wished the blonde lady to become the friend of the Countess de Crozon, he caused her to assume the name of Madame de Réal, which is a close resemblance to the name of a certain diamond broker, a woman with a pale complexion and golden hair. And the good Lupin said to himself, if ever the wicked Ganimard gets upon the track of the blonde lady, how useful it will be to me if he should be diverted to the track of the honest diamond broker. A wise precaution that has borne good fruit. A little note sent to the newspaper read by the wicked Ganimard, a perfume bottle intentionally forgotten by the genuine blonde lady at the Hotel Bon Rivage, the name and address of Madame Réal written on the hotel register by the genuine blonde lady, and the trick is played. What do you think of it, Ganimard? I wish to tell you the true story of this affair, knowing that you would be the first to laugh over it. Really, it is quite amusing, and I have enjoyed it very much. Accept my best wishes, dear friend, and give my kind regards to the worthy Monsieur Dudouis, Arsène Lupin. He knows everything,
muttered Ganimard, but he did not see the humor of the situation as Lupin had predicted.
He knows some things I have never mentioned to anyone. How could he find out that I was going to invite you here, Chief? How could he know that I had found the first perfume bottle? How could he find out those things?
He stamped his feet and tore his hair, a prey to the most tragic despair. Monsieur Dudouis felt sorry for him, and said, "Come, Ganimard, never mind. Try to do better next time." And Monsieur Dudouis left the room, accompanied by Madame Réal. During the next 10 minutes, Ganimard read and reread the letter of Arsène Lupin. Monsieur and Madame de Crozon, Monsieur d'Hautrec, and Monsieur Gerbois were holding an animated discussion in a corner of the room. At last the Count approached the detective and said, "My dear monsieur, after your investigation, we are no nearer the truth than we were before."
"Pardon me, but my investigation has established these facts. That the blonde lady is the mysterious heroine of these exploits, and that Arsène Lupin directed them."
"Those facts do not solve the mystery. In fact, they render it more obscure. The blonde lady commits a murder in order to steal the blue diamond, and yet she does not steal it. Afterwards she steals it and gets rid of it by secretly giving it to another person. How do you explain her strange conduct?"
"I cannot explain it."
"Of course, but perhaps someone else can."
"Who?"
The Count hesitated, so the Countess replied frankly, "There is only one man besides yourself who is competent to enter the arena with Arsène Lupin and overcome him. Have you any objection to our engaging the services of Herlock Sholmes in this case?" Ganimard was vexed at the question, but stammered a reply.
"No, but I do not understand what—"
"Let me explain. All this mystery annoys me. I wish to have it cleared up. Monsieur Gerbois and Monsieur d'Hautrec have the same desire, and we have agreed to send for the celebrated English detective."
"You are right, madame,"
replied the detective, with a loyalty that did him credit.
"You are right. Old Ganimard is not able to overcome Arsène Lupin. But will Herlock Sholmes succeed? I hope so, as I have the greatest admiration for him, but it is improbable."
"Do you mean to say that he will not succeed?"
That is my opinion. I can foresee the result of a duel between Herlock Sholmes and Arsène Lupin. The Englishman will be defeated.
But, in any event, can we count on your assistance?
Quite so, madame. I shall be pleased to render Monsieur Sholmes all possible assistance.
Do you know his address?
Yes. 219 Parker Street.
That evening, Monsieur and Madame de Crozon withdrew the charge they had made against